Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Serge Bui. I am the CEO of the Agri-Food Innovation Council. Thank you for being part of our discussion on the benefits of space research and innovation on agriculture and agri-food. I would like to first start by thanking the following organizations for partnering with us for this event: AgWest Bio and Gallant. Thank you to both of you for participating with us. Before we begin our moderated discussion, I have a few technical notes to share. The chat bar will not be active for the attendees. That said, you are welcome and actually encouraged to ask your questions using the Q&A button. If you see a question asked by another attendee that you like, you may upvote the question in order to move it up the queue. If you would prefer to ask your question verbally, please use the raise hand button next to the Q&A button, and we will beam you up to the rest of the panel so we can have your question answered directly. Once identified, you will be invited to unmute yourself and to ask your question. Space-based technologies are enabling new advances for farmers, agronomists, and food manufacturers, and data from satellites are informing farmers and enabling better forecasting and increased production. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, and indeed it does exist, provides information on the benefits of space for agriculture. The US Space Agency, NASA, also is looking at the benefits of some of their work for agriculture. So what does it mean for Canada? This is what we're going to be looking at today. And I'm really pleased to have the following people joining us as panelists to provide some of their expertise for our discussion. Clélia Cothier, Project Manager, Deep Space Food Challenge at the Canadian Space Agency. Tony Blackwell, Owner, Agronomist, and Precision Ag Consultant at NithField Advanced Agronomy. Dr. Mike Dixon, Professor and Director of Control Environment Systems Research Faculty, School of Environmental Sciences at the University of Guelph, and Molly Gallant, Program Manager at Bioenterprise Corporation. Before beginning the moderated discussion, I now invite our panelists to say a few words about themselves and their organization and their link to the topic. I will start by alphabetically, and then I reserve myself the right to change the order for questions after that. Tony, based on your last name, you're the number one.
Thank you. So my name is Tony Bockwell. I own and operate a agronomic consulting business in Southern Ontario, as well as a grower. On our farm, we farm a couple thousand acres, and the majority of it is research, and a lot of it's technology-based research. And yeah, it's kind of an always changing atmosphere and applies well with the consulting side of things to try and stay up with the technology and advancements, which we are forever failing at, trying to stay ahead of the curve, so to speak. So thanks for having me here today.
Great. Clélia, could you provide the same introduction background, please?
Absolutely. My name is Claudia Cote. Thanks for having me here today. Very pleased to be on the panel. I'm an Impact Canada Fellow working with the Privy Council Office, and I'm specialized in the organization of challenge prizes. So my background is more in social and open innovation. And I joined the Canadian Space Agency about 2 years ago to manage a Deep Space Food Challenge that we organize in collaboration with NASA. So it's a challenge that we're organized to incentivize Canadians and Canadian innovators to come up with food production systems that will support long duration missions, as well as having a positive impact on Earth. And actually, in the context of that, I've seen Mike and Molly in the context of the challenge. So I'm guessing we might come back on that later, but great to see them again.
Great. Thank you very much. And you introduced Mike. So Mike, your turn.
Yes, and a very timely opportunity. Thanks for for having me and joining this panel. The context and the topic here is extremely timely. As Clélia just mentioned, the Deep Space Food Challenge is underway, and we're engaged with that. But I'm the director of our program here at the University of Guelph, which started more than 25 years ago with its first project that had space in the subtitle. So we've been growing and building on that ever since, and currently represent, I guess, Canada's main contribution internationally to what's called that niche field of biological life support, plants in space. So we have a pretty substantial and quite mature core of technical expertise here in Guelph in this particular area, and some of the topics that are listed here in the questions are directly and perfectly relevant. So I'm pleased to see that.
Right, and if anybody is concerned about my virtual background, we had a discussion with Mike, and Mike asked if his background was appropriate. And if you live in Ontario and you're facing snow and freezing rain tomorrow, as I am near Ottawa, his background is absolutely not appropriate. Therefore, I decided to use mine as a more appropriate one for the discussion. Molly, your turn, please.
Sure. I would say space is probably colder than Ottawa, but sometimes it comes close. So my name's Molly Gallant. I'm a program manager with Bioenterprise, and we are a business accelerator supporting enterprises in the food and ag tech space. We also offer a variety of programming, which is really where my role comes into play, supporting our various funding programs that are regionally offered here in Ontario as well as across Canada. So we offer non-repayable funding to companies that are looking to scale up and expand. We work with some companies kind of relating to the space kind of development area, but more specifically, we engaged with the Canadian Space Agency and Clélia about this time last year to support the promotion of the Deep Space Food Challenge. So working to support matchmaking between teams and kind of create competitive applications for the initiative through the use of our network. So pleased to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Molly. I do appreciate this. So, as I indicated, I do have some prepared questions which have been shared with our participants in advance, but we are encouraging the attendees to ask questions directly. But first, my question is fairly broad, and I'm going to ask, as a start, I'm going to ask Molly if she can answer, and then I'll ask all the other participants on this. What can the work done in space bring to agriculture and food in Canada?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think primarily, and I think this was part of the objective of the Deep Space Food Challenge, was for some of these solutions that some of these applicants are working towards can be actually adapted to be used on Earth to create kind of new and unique food production systems that are more suitable for really extreme, difficult growing conditions that previously we weren't able to really grow food in. So of course, in Canada, we've got a fairly large proportion of our country that previously has been difficult to grow food in. But not just in Canada, I mean, around the world, there's kind of, agriculture farmers are being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. We've got growing global population, a need to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And then, producing food in space, you have to really be working in a closed system. So a lot of that kind of minimizing waste, those kinds of attributes can come into play, and I think be really relevant to the future of agri-food here on Earth. I think additionally, collaboration. I know the objective with the Deep Space Food Challenge was to facilitate this collaboration across sectors and across different organization types. I think trying to solve such a big, ambitious goal is difficult for just one organization to do. So really trying to pave that way for collaboration, and hopefully, that can extend to other issues that we're facing, I think, in the sector. And finally, and I will hand it back to, as I'm sure we've got a very impressive panels today, so I won't take up too much of the time, but from my perspective, I think improving, building on the really strong reputation that Canada's agriculture system already has around the, globally, as being a really safe and reliable, really adaptable community. So I think kind of increasing and improving upon the already great reputation that we have around the world.
Fantastic. Clélia, can you add to this, please?
Yes, absolutely. And Molly had a great start with a question. One thing I'll add maybe is that there's sort of two perspectives when we talk about space in agriculture. One I've gotten to know more over the last 2 years, but there's how agriculture is helped in its current form with satellites, for example. And there's actually a lot of my colleagues at CSA working in Earth observation that provide some data that can help farmers. So that's a field that I don't know as much in, but that's definitely one way that space benefits current like agricultural and food practices. The other one, as Molly said, is more around new systems and how current technologies are built for space, and in the idea of having these technologies for planetary bodies in space will help us rethink some of the ways that we produce food, and whether it's in harsh environments like the north or even food deserts. When we look at the social innovation side of the problem, there are a lot of parts and of communities that don't really have ready access to fresh foods, and so different new systems can help fill some of these food gaps from a social side as well, and that's what we're very excited about. Some of the solutions are being created in the challenge.
Tony, would you mind taking a stab at to this as well? I think you're perfectly positioned as well on this.
Yeah, I think I'll just focus on the kind of technology side as it relates to kind of current agriculture practices, since that's kind of my background. But it's pretty exciting to see how that technology is moving forward, and more for an efficiency or a economy of scale, that we're able to use satellites directly right down to the field level, down to the square foot or the acre even, and seeing that challenge and opportunity of getting that technology into advisors or local growers that they can then use and execute in real seasonal challenges, or having models for predictive crop growth. There's really limitless opportunities for this, and it's exciting. It's our experience has started with the drones and the inefficient kind of down to earth stuff, and looked at the challenges of just not being able to scale that up at any capacity, even for a small grower. So hopefully this focus of technology within space allows that opportunity to kind of spread across the country and be more adapted. But yeah, that's my point to that question.
Mike, would you weigh in on this as well?
Yeah, I don't have a great deal to add. That's very well covered. I guess what the casual observer has to appreciate is that in terms of technology development, technology deployment, commercial opportunities with technology, space is a really small market. We don't do it very often. We don't even have rockets in Canada. We can't blast off or do anything, so we have to collaborate with others. But the vast majority, especially in this particular field of biological life support, food production, food determines how far from Earth we can go and how long we can stay. So it's critically important, and for Canada to take a leading role in that agenda means that we will develop the technology, we'll develop the expertise, the training opportunities, the commercial opportunities for industry participants who are authors or co-authors of the next generation of technology in controlled environment agriculture. It's not that it's in space, you spend the money in the Canadian economy. So it could and will develop an extremely powerful economic engine for Canada in this particular sector.
Great, thank you for this. Based on your knowledge, what are the top 3 current areas of interest for agriculture and food in relation to space-based technologies, the current ones? And I'm going to start by yourself, Clélia.
I'll keep it short, and I know that Mike will have a lot to say on this one. But I'll link to the challenge, the Deep Space Food Challenge, and some of the assessment criteria that we're using. What has been important in the way that we constructed the challenge. To give you some context, NASA has been working on designing the challenge and understanding some of these technological issues for a long time, and the challenge precisely for 2-3 years before it was launched. So the way that we designed the challenge and the assessment criteria was in order to push the participants towards solving some of these issues that they're observing. And some of these were the palatability, and that includes the diversity. There is like fatigue, fatigue is definitely something that happens in space, and we're talking about that in the context of the ISS, which is even not that far and gets frequent cargoes. But when you think about growing food or having a mission that's far, and Mike said that very well earlier about the food that we produce defines how far we're able to go. And so if you think about a crew being on another planetary body for 2-3 years time with the same kind of food every day, it's not going to work. So the diversity of the food that we're going to be able to produce is very important. Then there's the safety is critical as well. Having the current systems for the current systems with the ISS, all the food is tested on Earth. When we're in space, we won't be able to have the same the vast diversity of labs and of safety tools in order to test the food before we send into space. Sorry, everything is produced in situ in space, and so you need to make sure that everything is safe. So the development of sensors, there's the HACCP methodology to make sure that as you produce, you understand how you can keep the food safe. And again, I know Mike will be able to dive deeper into some of these technical questions, but the idea of having sensors, being able to keep the food safe when it's produced, as well as when it's like the actual product itself is very important. So having a controlled environment that's really circular, where nothing is wasted, where all the resources are being efficiently used is critically important. And this is what we designed in the challenge to make sure that the participants would design a system going and answering these technological challenges.
Great, Mike. I think Clélia has hinted that you have a couple of things to say on this. So how about you go right ahead?
Yeah, I've been using rationale similar to this to justify just about every grant proposal for the last 30 years. So it's there are, and I struggle to narrow it down to three, but the key ones come in the context of the controlled environment agriculture application and the spin-off into terrestrial applications. But for example, we currently do not have a reliable way to sensor technology that is robust and reliable enough to continuously recycle a hydroponic nutrient solution. That technology in the world does not exist today. We must have it on the moon and Mars, because that leads into the second element here, which is recycling. As Clélia indicated, you can't throw anything away. When you go to space, there's no such thing as garbage anymore. So we must learn how to recycle everything. We currently don't know how to do that very well, but those technologies, the sensors required to achieve full loop recycling, the water in particular, and the atmosphere, and finally, automation. The biggest line item in the budget of a controlled environment agriculture commercial enterprise today is personnel. Energy is creeping up there, but personnel, highly qualified personnel, what the feds love to call HQPs, is definitely the highest cost. So offsetting and coming up with automation, and you got to have automation on the moon and bars because crew time is one of those, as Clélia will respect, crew time is one of those big line items in the cost of space exploration. So offsetting that with automation, robotics, stuff that Canadians are really darn good at. So those ideas of sensor technology that's more robust and reliable, recycling protocols, and automation, robotics. That's my top list.
Great, wonderful. Tony, would you like to take a stab at this as well?
Yeah, I think Mike made up some good points. I think I'll focus more on, you know, the question was based on my knowledge, what are the top 3 current areas of interest for agriculture and how space supports that? I'm kind of going to more take from a space looking down on Earth instead of the other direction. But personnel, a good point. The challenge in the industry is we lack the skilled boots on the ground to efficiently analyze all the challenges that it takes to grow crops and support crops. So a lot of these efficient sensor systems, satellite support systems through guidance, and we call it micro automation or SWAT type concepts, where we want to look at multiple mini equipment that minimizes an environmental footprint throughout fields and also has an efficiency of kind of a swarm effect to grow crops, plant crops, things like that. So it all ties with that technology and personnel challenges and just trying to automate and look at the efficiencies that, you know, space can support down directly to earth and agriculture. I'm not sure that was 3, but maybe one big one.
There we go. Molly, your take on this, please.
Yeah, I think along a similar vein, the applications in, you know, some of the solutions that come out of this really specific context that you're trying to research and develop in, but how that can be adapted to impact, you know, really big issues like mitigating impacts of climate change and the question of food security and, you know, all the complexities that go into that, as well as, you know, mitigating food waste throughout the food supply chain here on Earth. I think plant-based proteins is an area that might be of particular interest and see some, you know, downstream effects of this kind of work that they're doing, because that's a more sustainable, more, I guess, shelf-stable, perhaps, form of protein. And I don't know, Mike, you can probably comment better on that than I can. But I also think it's really interesting, and something that I loved about the Deep Space Food Challenge was that it wasn't just that the food was safe and nutritious, it was also that it was palatable, which is an aspect of food that should not be underappreciated, because if it doesn't taste good, then that's going to make those long duration space missions really difficult. And I think it also speaks to, you know, some of the solutions that we have here on Earth. They need to be really considering all of those different aspects of what goes into food, and seeing it as more than just micro and macronutrients, but seeing it as this entity that we consume, and all the other implications that has. So yeah, very broad strokes on that question, but.
That's fine. Thank you very much. I do encourage our attendees to put some questions out, you know, recognizing that we'll have some more questions ourselves here. We do, you know, and I do also encourage our attendees and everybody else to look at the series of webinars that we put online, including this one will be online. We've had lots of viewing on a number of them, so it's quite interesting as well to see. But what are the trends in future research? What are we looking at that will have an impact on agri-food? So, you know, taking a crystal ball or beaming yourself up in the future, what do you see as the future of this for us? And Mike, I'm going to start by you this time.
Well, thanks for that. Then these guys won't scoop me. But I think the trends are in automation and robotics, that kind of technology to offset requirements for personnel. It is definitely an issue. Also, artificial intelligence, to integrating AI solutions to controlled environment agriculture, horticultural management, disinfection protocols, you know, all of this stuff that you need to take care of when you're trying to grow food in a box and effectively for space or for applications here on Earth. Northern Canada, for example, comes to mind definitely. So that leads from the list that we talked about just now. Leading from that will be integrating new technologies to service an AI environment, imaging technology, sensor technology that AI can take advantage of to build the catalog of background and information required to be effective.
Great. Molly, I'm going to ask you to go next.
Sure. Yeah, I think one point that kind of comes to mind in this regard, and I think it relates not only to working on space-based food production solutions, but also in light of COVID-19 and other international challenges, is I think there's going to be more of a move to be less reliant on imports here in Canada and really kind of increase our own domestic production to meet needs here. Something that we found when doing the work with CSA through the Deep Space Food Challenge was kind of this feeling that maybe Canada was really good at importing some novel technologies, but and adapting them to kind of our context here rather than perhaps innovating locally. So I think maybe more of a move to doing a little bit of that more here in Canada. I think also it kind of another important aspect when you're dealing with any sort of innovative kind of new technology is to maintain that trust that the food production system has done such a good job at building with consumers and working on transparency in how we're producing food and how that applies here on Earth, and be it through programs, extension work. I think that kind of trust transparency piece is hopefully where we're going to see some more research in terms of how we can communicate better and continue to build that positive relationship.
Great, I appreciate that. Tony, your turn.
Yeah, so probably one of the trends in research that Mike touched on, as well as Molly, is more of this predictive ability to analyze crop growth potential, crop growth challenges. With Molly's point on the ever risk of food scarcity and whatnot, within Canada we can support a lot more internal food production, but with a lot of these AI and the new platforms of imagery and sensors, we are able to start with research analyzing the ability of those to predict crops at an early age. We get into a lot of weather modeling is another key point to some of the future research, kind of this looking at forecasting and better, I guess, proactive ways to grow crops before things of Mother Nature takes hold, diseases, insects, things like that. More of a proactive than reactive approach, which has been more of the traditional agricultural system. So kind of those two ones, those the weather modeling side and the proactive use of sensors and imagery to predict crop modeling is kind of the key things that are getting really heavily looked into in research at a boots and ground level. And there's some promising future there, I believe.
Clélia, you're next.
Yes, thank you. If I try to take a more like macro and social approach and build on what the other panelists have said, I think when we think about the future of food and the different elements that come into play, or the different topics that come sometimes on some of these international discussions on the future of food, we hear about food security, and there's actually an SDG of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that's dedicated to making sure that we have no more hunger on our planet, and that we can feed the planet. There's definitely what Molly said around sovereignty and having more local production, and I think that's a topic that is true for food. It's true for other kind of production, but definitely a big one here in Canada. There's also the question of climate and climate resiliency, and the need to have like control environments to, or at least some resiliency in different systems to make sure that we remain sovereign with our food production. One thing across these different themes is also the diversity of food that we eat. And beyond agriculture, if we think about food production and the different kind of intakes of food that we have, it kind of brings to also the diversity of solutions that we're starting to see in the challenge. And we've seen a great diversity, and we've been amazed by the different solutions that have been put forward. Some are working on insect production, some are working on a blend of mushrooms and fruits and vegetables. Some teams are working on algae. Yeah, that's how you say it in English, algae. And some even on some yeast based. And so there's more and more alternative sources of protein and foods that we're talking about. A lot of these big conferences, and last week was South by Southwest Future of Food conference, and there's definitely talks about what are the different and new foods that we'll need in order to feed our planet from this aspect of food security, of the ability to produce locally and to combat like the impacts of climate. And I'll add one quick thing that's more on the trends of innovation rather than the technological trends of agriculture. But we're talking about challenges, and challenges are not a new approach, but definitely more used not only by governments but also by foundations. And Nesta recently supported, which Nesta is an innovation organization based in the UK. They recently supported the Weston Family Foundation in designing a challenge prize of $33 million. I think it's over 6 years to boost the sustainable production of fruits and vegetables in Canada. I think it's around growing berries out of season. So it all links, I think, the perspective I'm trying to bring here is more like the social and like political dimension also of the importance of innovation in the field. And I think that's definitely something that will not diminish over time with all the challenges we're facing.
Mute. The story of the 2020, 2021, and 2022, it continues. I'm going to move away a little bit from the prepared questions, although I will go back to them. Listening to all of you about the importance of this, I'm wondering whether or not the policy structure and the funding structure or the financial structure of what we're doing right now is appropriate, and whether or not there are things that could be suggested or changed. And I see Mike raising his hand immediately to that, so I will definitely go to him, although I see Molly shaking her head this way as well. And I see Clélia wondering about, how do I from the Space Agency and the Privy Council get away from providing a clear answer? Do we have the appropriate policy structure to support this, both in terms of the research and the adoption, and in terms of funding? Where are we at on this? So, Mike, I'll let you go first.
Actually, Serge, I wanted to catch the last topic before we left it, and add something. Clélia made me think of it when she's talking about the Weston Challenge, and of course our program is steeped in some element of that somehow, kind of conspicuous by our absence if we're not. But in terms of the direction that controlled environment agriculture has to go, we got to get the heck away from lettuce. Lettuce is not going to feed anybody. It's not. I don't even call it food until you put the ranch dressing on it. So the salad greens solution to controlled environment agriculture entrepreneurial activity over the last almost decade now has to morph into more substantial food crops, proteins, carbs, etc. We have to get away from salad greens because they are a niche commercial activity, and they will come and go. So and the Weston challenge is part of that, getting into something that's anything but lettuce. So I wanted to make sure that we had that point covered, because it's definitely one that's been burning on me for the last decade.
It's an interesting point, Mike, but it is something that when we're looking at northern Canada and production of food in northern Canada, and I know we're moving away from space, although for some of us it's as far from our daily reality. There is a concern about the type of food that we want to grow over there. If you look at vertical farming, one of the key things I'm hearing is, if we're moving towards vertical farming, it is lettuce, it is green leafy. There is being mentioned as the key candidate on there. So it's an interesting question and debate on that.
Absolutely. And it's one that won't go away.
No. Now, I did ask a question on funding in policy, and as you were the last one, I'm going to ask you to provide an answer if possible.
Well, we've been, I guess, everything we do is funded externally. And as a university, we're a charitable institution, it turns out. So we, a cost recovery, research and technology development agenda is what we take care of. And funding is always very difficult. I get more proposals rejected. Well, about half of them are, so if you're getting about a 50-50 shot in terms of generating funding, supporting HQPs, the development and the training, new technology development, deployment, commercialization, opportunities for your industry partners. These are all elements that foster the research agenda in Canada. Leverage funding is the order of the day. So I'm not sure that I have the answer to, what's a better way to do this. Clearly, a way that gets more funding into our research pockets is the better way, as far as I'm concerned. But it defeats me as to exactly how to. Maybe Clélia has a better answer from her perspective in terms of, being part of the purse string system. I don't know. That's the best I got, I'm afraid.
And I will get a Clélia soon, but from Bioenterprise, Molly.
Yeah, thanks. So something that we do at Bioenterprise is we receive funding from various sources that we then reallocate to SMEs across the food and agri-tech sector, typically in project-based funding installments. So we're there usually on a matching basis to provide a little bit of money so that they can execute a project. And we've been doing that for many, many years now. And I think something that's changed is that kind of eligibility criteria piece for these types of opportunities. And from our perspective, we're kind of managed by who we're being funded by and the objectives of that organization. So that can be, and there's so many different levels of government. And historically, I think as a country, we tend to be a little bit divided by province or by area across the country. So, we have some regional funding that we deliver here in Southern Ontario. We have funding we deliver across Ontario. We have funding we deliver out in Nova Scotia. And usually there's a piece of, being headquartered in that area to be accessing that funding. Anyway, I could talk about that all day. But one area that we've seen a little bit of a gap in is supporting companies that, they had that initial investment, that kind of seed round where they've got their product up to maybe a TRL 5 or 6, but then it's getting that money to really push them towards commercialization. And not only having the money, but having the network and the mentorship and the coaching and the support to help them execute and really expand. I think that's a little bit of a missing piece. We do have great programs like the SHRED credits to help, kind of get some of that money back from the R&D side, but not so much on the commercialization side. And a really interesting point that we've spoken about with some of our partners is this, specifically in ag tech, that there's this idea of kind of finding that unicorn company who's going to, have that really amazing success story. And they're the ones that are attracting a lot of the support from the network. But how do we build up that pipeline of companies that allow us to have, a lot more really successful companies? And I think one way of doing that might be through the use of micro grants to kind of, and, really early stage supporting to try to get those companies on their feet and then really, progressing through these different stages. I can't so much speak to a policy side. It's not as much something that a space that I work in, but I think another solution again is to try to foster collaboration across sector, across country, and across government levels, which is something that the Deep Space Food Challenge did so well, was that it had that really kind of open, anywhere from across Canada opportunity. So long-winded answer, yeah.
Oh, good answer, thank you. Tony, on the same thing on the funding and policies related to space-based technologies and provide your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so we as a business have a lot of research. So we chase after grants, get pulled in to support other projects and things like that. And I do want to echo Molly's point that there is sometimes a lot of research support into the the technology of the year or the code word of the year in agriculture, and we see that money get pushed into areas and maybe miss some of the foundation research we should be doing. Protein-based plant systems, alternate farming systems, methodology, that sort of stuff in more northern regions, that sort of stuff. So, there is that challenge with policy and research where we get a disconnect between maybe the growers and the consumers, and we get people in the middle, and it's hard to get everyone to talk. It never will happen. But the point is I think there's valuable resources on both ends of those, and from policy and on the research. We just have to bring more people into some of these discussions to make sure the funding gets spent and moved to the appropriate long-term goals. We've seen a lot of technology that we've been involved in and supported fizzle out. It just wasn't sustainable as an industry, and that money could have been spent into way other highly focused areas of return, and it was just the fad of that time, and that's where it went. So it's just a little more responsibility of all of us to look at that in a better process, I think, personally.
Clélia, I kept you for last for obvious reasons. I wanted you to be able to react on this. Can you provide me your feedback on this?
Absolutely, and I'd like to point as well to the challenge approach that we've been using. First, one of the reasons we're using a challenge approach is that it enables to involve a lot more players than the usual suspects. And so we even saw in the first phase of the challenge, out of our recipients or the winners of the first phase, 74% had not received a Government of Canada grant or contribution in the past 5 years. So that's a lot of new players. Some companies were newly formed, startups, university teams, some private companies as well, and I think even one not-for-profit. So really, like, the idea of opening up the source of funding and the eligibility pool is one thing that was important for us in challenges. The other particularity of a challenge, and I know it's not, well, I'll say the idea first, is that it's based on results. So we're actually funding and giving a prize at the end of a phase for the results that are being observed, rather than giving a grant in advance in order to realize the work. And so what that means is that it also diversifies or spreads out the risk. And it's not just the government giving a grant to realize a project. We're actually rewarding the ones that are achieving best or the fastest some of the results. So it kind of places government as part of the innovation equation, but also opens up for, as Molly said, more collaboration. Some teams are looking to investors. There's also the idea of bringing in some private R&D in order to advance in the challenge. So that's kind of like on the challenge approach. On the food side of funding for like food and space, I think we share a similar battle in the sense that even working inside government, there are cases to be made in terms of asking for different kinds of budgets and pursuing certain initiatives. So food as well as other elements are being observed or compared as to what contributions Canada could make in space exploration. And we're definitely within our food production initiative team at CSA pushing and arguing for why food is such an important and competitive topic to focus on in Canada. So also trying to see how we can get more funds, not only for the initiatives, but also for the industry and the players that will help us get there as a country and be competitive on the international stage.
Great. Mike, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly, what Tony said something, and Clélia followed it, added a bit to it. But Tony, you're talking about technologies and entrepreneurial kind of approaches and technology developments that just fizzle. And you know, I've been the author of dozens of those kinds of things. And the reality, and this is what I tell my students and my colleagues: the stuff that we do at the research at the bench, and you know, making and breaking stuff and coming up with innovative ideas, all kinds of bright ideas, is worth about 15 cents on the dollar of the final outcome. 50 cents on the dollar is marketing. And that's where we miss. The rest is production and distribution. But a full half of the investment required to bring an innovative, bright idea to the you know, the corner stall in Walmart is marketing. It has to be, and that's where we don't have that expertise. That's, you know, we're down in we're doing the fun stuff. We're in the sandbox, playing around, breaking stuff, learning things, learning what not to do mostly, and passing that technology transfer on to the commercial sector, where they have to then invest in the marketing.
Great. Clélia, this is good. Clélia.
Yeah, I'd love to react to that quickly, and I think it's a question that's important not just in the space and food discussion. Like, I've been really interested with innovation ecosystems and how they function, and how like I had some colleagues talking about the trifecta of innovation, which involved the private sector, the university researchers, and the more like younger innovators and startups. And I think it's crucial that there are some of these links that are being made between someone that will have an entrepreneurial spirit and have the knack for going to get funding and building his own startup or building an idea. And but these types of people, these types of personalities don't necessarily have the full background and depth that researchers like yourself, Mike, have and have built for numbers of decades. And so it's important that there's some of these mixes, and that's like not even, that's my like background in innovation and this perspective more so than my role at the CSA speaking. But it's really crucial, and I think it points to one of the questions that you had in mind as well, and on the adoption and how do we move innovations from different ideas, from funding proposals, to actually ensuring that innovations are adopted and implemented and have like tangible results. And we're moving towards results-based funding, outcomes-based funding as well in different contexts. And so demonstrating some of these results or some of the collaborations, and Molly hinted as well earlier to the partnerships, project-based funding, where different partners come together and enterprises or organizations like Bioenterprise or even Zonac Tech provide funding in order to facilitate that implementation and that adoption. And I think these kind of like blended approaches to financing project and financing innovation are more and more present, not just in this field, but in many fields. And it's important that Canada really like links up the wealth of knowledge that is present within post-secondary institutions and innovative ecosystems, along with the large companies that have resources and funds to also push that forward. So there's really like a mix between sectors, and obviously the government and the public sector plays a role in that equation as well. But I think that we can't solve challenges without this kind of collaboration approach between sector, and it does require a translation between actors, and it's not always easy because we speak different languages, but getting to translate that, and even you brought us together around the table. If we look at our different profiles around the table, we are bringing these different perspectives, and I think it's really important in these questions of making innovation more tangible and bringing the results. I'll stop because I've talked for a lot,
No,
but I'm very passionate about that, obviously.
It's actually good, and that's why we're happy to have the discussion and to get back and forth between the panelists. Absolutely. I'm going to ask a bit of a different question, and you know, you've touched upon it a little bit, but are Canadian farmers able to fully benefit from space-based technologies, and how can we better encourage adoption of some of those things? I'm going to start by you, Tony.
No. No, there's a real knowledge transfer challenge and adoption take up with Canadian farmers. I think there is a lot of technologies that are underutilized, whether that's a challenge from growers themselves or the way we don't transfer those skill sets to them. You know, I think there's the potential for that to increase substantially, but the challenge of just some of the, I'm just trying to think of an example to make this a little more, we'll say imagery or something like space-based imagery and that sort of stuff. Currently, to get into that platform system and work with it, you need to be pretty much a GIS specialist to be able to work with it. Well, that's just not a skill set, you know, a Western Ontario farmer has. It's not his business. It's not his responsibility to have that. So we have to look at how, you know, the end state of some of these technologies are going to be used, and maybe this is the most terrible saying ever, dumb it down into a more simplistic form. Maybe we're over technologying a lot of these opportunities, and I don't know if that's a solution or more of a challenge, but the point is there is just this potential for so much stuff that we just can't seem to get it disseminated or get the adaption there. And I would love for the rest of you to have a swing at that because I don't know the solution, but feel free to comment for sure.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate that answer. And that's why I started by you, because I knew you'd set it up in this way. Clélia, I'm going to go to you directly.
Thank you. And I started touching upon it a little bit in my rant earlier, but I think there's a crucial role that play organizations like Bioenterprise, Zone AgTech that we've worked with in the context of the challenge, because it's all I have the word come up in my head in French. It's all about the maillage, the
wedding of the wedding of those.
Yeah, and not so much wedding, like, you know, the mixing and the networking and the blending of different actors that come with their own strength. If you take a young tech entrepreneurs wanting to revolutionize the food sector or even work with farmers, if that young entrepreneur has never been in the field, confronting his project, his prototype to the reality of what farmers live on the field, it's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to get implemented or adopted. And so I think the idea of experimentation, rooms for experimentation, field of experimentation, that's one thing that Zone AgTech is building. And Molly, you might be able also to speak to that a bit more. But the idea of bringing people together in one space, and the Quebec government is facilitating that a lot by financing some Zone AgTech and creating a whole a huge space with different I'm missing my words today in English, I'm sorry, with various desserts. How do we say that again, sir?
Desserts?
No, des desserts agricoles.
Oh, greenhouses.
Thank you. Greenhouses. I should know. My brain is a little off in English today. Like greenhouses or fields, and the idea that these places could be sandboxes for various actors to get together and test things and fail early, fail often, and then realize, well, this is how it works or how it could work, and then move ahead based on the results and the outcomes that they're achieving. So this idea of maillage and connections is super important. That's why we decided to work with Bioenterprise and Zonactech in the context of the challenge at the beginning. It's because we understood that what we required innovators in the context of the challenge was more than just one set of expertise, and that having different companies or innovators bring together different ideas, different expertise, or even could be companies that have nothing to do with space and food in the first place, like lighting, like sensors. Maybe there are some companies that do sensors for a completely different business, and Mike can maybe tell us more if like this is really applicable if they're in a completely different business in the first place. But really mixing the fields and the different technologies and working on local early adoption experimentation, I think, is a way that will help encourage further adoption.
Molly.
Yeah, thanks. A lot of really good points have been made already, and I'll just kind of build on that. I think one of the perhaps, gaps here is that I think a big overarching issue that we're not going to solve tomorrow, but rural broadband connectivity issues. So if you have this solution developed in an urban setting, and maybe one of these like really concentrated acceleration testbed type sites, and it works really well there, but then to bring it to, a rural farm and to try to set it up in that context where you have really limited or really intermittent access to the internet can be a really big challenge. As well as interoperability between some of these different solutions. I think that poses just more of a universal barrier to adoption. But specifically in this moving from these space-based technologies to an agricultural context, I was reading a report the other day that spoke about adoption, barriers to adoption. And one of them that was, really prominent was that farmers want to, and again, Tony, you could speak better to this, but this report was saying that farmers want to see a technology proven in perhaps on a peer's farm, to show that it works in that context. And how do we take something that's been proven to work in space and create that parallel to a terrestrial application, and to prove, even though it worked here, how do we prove that it works in this other totally different, different challenge kind of context. And then, of course, I think a big point also is the bottom line. Like, is this solution going to be cost effective? What are the metrics for success? So something, on the research side, this might be changing again, but big factor in metric is publications. Whereas, for primary agriculture, it's maybe yield, ROI, these kinds of questions. So how do we take our different outcomes and objectives and find that, Venn diagram where they overlap, where we can see mutual benefit, I think is something that we could all work a little bit more on.
Thank you. Mike.
I think I would, just to answer the question very directly, are Canadian farmers able to fully benefit from space-based tech development, et cetera? No. And I think it speaks to that issue of marketing. The knowledge transfer, the knowledge and technology transfer aspects of every research project, these are stressed, especially federal and provincial grants. It's what have you done for me lately is an extremely important element. And how can you benefit Canadians? And you have to articulate this in excruciating detail sometimes. And the bottom line is it doesn't seem to work. First of all, there is the perception that space stuff is really expensive, so I can't possibly afford that in the application of conventional agriculture technology requirements. Spacey stuff is surely too expensive. I take it very, very seriously in my responsibility as a funded researcher, appreciating that a good, very healthy chunk of my research funding comes from taxpayers. And so the, explaining how we spent their money is something I take very seriously. And articulating that in proposals and then following through with it. Publications, peer-reviewed scientific journal articles, that's one road, and that's a metric that the academic field, the academic community addresses. But it's, the average farmer doesn't read Plant Phys or recent advances in space. They just don't. So coming up with more straightforward, real language, simple, not simple, but articulate the issues in a straightforward. I'll put that machine off there. It is our challenge. I do 1 year 72, average about 60 or 70 tours of our facility annually for everyone from visiting dignitaries to the local Boy Scout troop. So and outreach and education, STEM related education, these are all elements and bits and pieces of the sales pitch for the space-based technology development as being applicable to terrestrial, in this case, agriculture. So we just have to keep plugging away at it. It's a thankless chore, but it's one that is incredibly important.
I appreciate that and some of the points that have been raised as well from the broadband issue, which I raised as recently as about 45 minutes ago with Senator Black, member of the Canadian Senate, and Mike as well, when you talk about the importance of making sure that research is understood and disseminated, and there is that understanding from producers of where their dollars are going, and that's so important. Absolutely, we did publish something on the dissemination of agriculture and agri-food research and innovation a few years ago on the importance of this and tools on how to do it, so farmers can better understand and use some of those things, or at least understand where this is going. I think that's essential and key to continue to get their support for what we're doing on that front. So, maybe the next question is, who are the global leaders, countries and or companies in space-based technologies related to agri-food production? And maybe I can combine two questions in one. Will the present international tensions affect the work done in the International Space Station and other space programs? I think that would be important to know. I will remind also attendees that they have a few more minutes to put in some questions, otherwise we will end it there. But so again, who are the global leaders, countries and or companies in space-based technologies related to agri-food production? And will the present international tensions affect the work done in the International Space Station? Maybe I'm going to start by you, Mike.
Thanks for that. And to put it mildly, the international tensions have already affected the International Space Station, where the Russians arrived in Ukrainian colors. Enough said. Beyond that, I honestly have no clue. I can't. But the global leaders in the last quarter century or so, Canada has risen on the backs of programs like ours at Guelph and others in other institutions across the country, has risen to be among the leaders in this particular field. And it's not, we come by it honestly, because the next worst base after a snowbank in Canada to grow food has got to be surface of the moon or Mars. So the technical challenge is not foreign to us. And of course, NASA has been playing in this game for a long time, but not that, about 15 years ago, they dropped the ball on controlled environment agriculture applications and tech development. They deferred to us basically because in around 2000, Canada invested in our facility, a major, about a $10 million investment at the time in the next generation of research infrastructure devoted to answering questions about how we're going to grow plants on the moon and Mars and beyond. So having the next generation of technology, and we still hold that leadership role because nobody's come along with multi-million-dollar investments again recently to take us out. But that's not to say that there's a lot of competition. The homework assignment list is enormous, so there's lots of room for new players here. We've worked recently we've been a partner with the European Space Agency and their life support and agri-food applications in space with the Melissa project since 1997 and collaborated directly with NASA since 1999. And so those are the main players, but more recently, the German Space Agency, as an institutional element in the game, have come along with a great deal of interest in life support in agriculture applications and spin-off into terrestrial applications. So we've done a really neat project with them in the Antarctic with the Eden ISS project, which has been lots of fun. So we've put greenhouses on the Arctic, the high Arctic, with the CSA and others, and we've done similar things in the Antarctic. So we've been at both ends of the planet trying to figure this out and deploy technologies for harsh environments, as well as the Middle East. They're getting, that's the new kids on the block are in the Middle East. So the UAR, United Arab Republic, so UAR or UAE, sorry, and Kuwait. We've worked with Kuwait. We have a long-standing collaboration agreement with the country of Kuwait. So there's new players, and everybody understandably gets it that food drives the equation, and coming up with the technologies to deploy in harsh environments in space and on Earth is the answer to it.
Great, thank you. Molly, any insight in this?
Can I cheat and say Mike Dixon is one of the global leaders here? I think, no, I think there's a lot of amazing potential here in Canada. And I think it's going to be really exciting to see some of those newcomers, as Mike mentioned, and, organizations that maybe haven't previously worked in this space, but have these really relevant parallels and applications here. So I think that's going to be really exciting to see. As for the second question there, kind of, seconding what Mike said, it's difficult to say, but, we were talking the other day in one of our meetings about how the, international tensions are impacting agriculture here on Earth as well, in terms of fluctuating commodity prices and fertilizer price and availability. So yeah, I think it's going to be throughout the interstellar universe, however you want to call it.
Great. No, I appreciate that answer. Clélia.
Thank you. I think Mike mentioned some of the players and the initiatives and that I had in mind. We're in discussion, like at the CSA, we're in discussion with DLR and NASA, as well as other organizations in planning the future. There's also personal exchanges, and that's one of the great things about also exchanging talent between some of these organizations and building links. We have one of a staff member that's currently coming from DLR, the German Aerospace Agency, and with us for a couple of years. Our team leader as well was one of the chief systems engineer. Am I saying that correctly, Mike? For the project mentioned, the Eden ISS project in Antarctica, and in general, space missions have always been international in nature, and that's why we're also teaming up with NASA in the context of the Deep Space Food Challenge. It's super important to have different perspectives, and for future missions, there will definitely be an international collaboration element in the context of space. So I'll leave it to that.
Great, thank you. Tony, any insight?
Yeah, I think as far as from a production and grower point of view, using space-based technologies, there's we're doing pretty good. You know, I don't want to be repeat some of the negative parts, but like as a country and as adaptation, we are ahead of the curve, I would say, when working internationally and seeing what other countries are doing. I don't know if there's really anybody that's winning at it yet or has it figured out. There are some countries, Israel, Australia, other countries with water-based challenges that are doing have way more focus, more so because of the climate risk there. I do see countries that the most challenging agriculture production countries seem to be using the technologies the best, if that makes any sense. The harder it is to farm in a country, the more they'll grab onto technologies because they show a direct return. They need to be better. And those are the tools they're going to use. They have farmed for hundreds of years and realize, you know, they need to change and stuff. And you see other areas, and we have areas in Canada that are naturally blessed with amazing soils and stuff, and they're somewhat, you know, not managed to their full potential, and perhaps even we're managing them poorly for the future. So I think those technologies in some countries and certain companies are able to penetrate other areas within the world better than other areas. But communication in agriculture is quite fluid, and it is a small world in agriculture. So I think as one country succeeds, we do see that dissemination of success throughout more and more. And then collaborated efforts with the space-based technologies that are multi-country only just add to that support and, you know, information support and technology distribution. So yeah, I don't think there's any clear winner, but looks like everybody's trying at least and has some small wins here and there. So
I'm going to be pushing a little bit more on this, and just by one last comment. I mean, the China National Space Administration, which is the name of their agency, is definitely moving forward on a number of things. They released a paper earlier this year on their priorities, and they're moving very fast, right? They're building their own space station, et cetera, et cetera. Are we at a risk of losing space? Not losing space. That was actually a good one, but losing speed and maybe falling behind some of the work that they're doing, because they're moving at speed of light, while we are facing challenges due to the recent events in Russia and Ukraine. And, you know, that is of concern. And everybody also read the papers and what happened recently with the Canadian Space Agency as well, and some investigations there. Clélia, would you comment a little bit on whether or not we're keeping our pace, or are there any concerns that we're going to fall behind? And that comes back to my initial question a few minutes ago when I talked about funding. Are we properly funding this?
My perspective is that the most important is that we remain in the collaboration and in talks with other space agencies. So that's the work that we're currently doing with DLR and NASA. And I think pulling resources, pulling expertise with some of our close partners and some new partners that we're building now is going to be the way forward. And also in the context of space exploration and a sustainable presence on the moon, space agencies talk to each other. CSA, and that's maybe a point of interest, CSA is currently the chair of the International Space Exploration Coordination Group. And there are some excellent papers on kind of coordination for lunar exploration and sustainable basis. So international collaboration remains of the utmost importance, and I think the link between building Canada's presence as a leader, as well as doubling down on the relations we have and the collaboration is going to be essential.
Appreciate that. I mean, you know, we can all read China harvested its first space rice last year, so it's quite interesting on that front. Any further comment on this issue by any of the other participants?
Yeah, I forgot China. How silly of me. We have a collaboration agreement with the Beihang University, which is the center of their advanced life support, so-called, or biological life support research agenda. And I'm personally acquainted with the leader of that program, Professor Liu Hong. And we've entertained graduate students in our facility from China. There's been warnings from our friends in the States at NASA that, you know, Mikey, if you're talking to the Chinese, you're going to have to stop talking to us. So there's all these political issues and tensions that I try to stay above or below or whatever, hide from at least, and try not to have them color or change and taint the academic research agenda. But in terms of, you ask a very critical question: are we funding this enough? Hell no. We're so far behind. It's almost laughable in some respects. It's remarkable that we are where we are. Quite frankly, I've been, you know, quoted with some facetious remarks in the past that the A-base budget for the Canadian Space Agency wouldn't change the tires on the shuttle. And that's not quite true, of course, but it's damn close. So we need, you know, and everybody has to understand, the general public has to understand that you spend the money in the Canadian economy. So the biggest piece that we can possibly bite off of the space exploration cookie is one that we should, because that is the economic engine for a country like Canada for the next 300 to 500 years. I'll climb off my soapbox here a little bit. You can tell I've done this before, but to no avail. We still are very seriously underfunding technology development that has tech transfer opportunities, especially in the agri-food sector, especially in Canada. As I say, we come by the challenge very honestly because of the harsh Canadian environment, the climate here. So it's time, and it's a very timely discussion to be having in a group like this.
And that's why we wanted to have the discussion, Mike, and that's why we proposed the topic of the webinar. And that's what we're going to be promoting this webinar quite a bit on our social media to gather increasing views, but also probably putting a statement out to our members on this issue, and you know, and clearly putting this as well as part of our national a call for a national strategy on agri-food research and innovation. It is indeed essential. There's absolutely no doubt that we put more resources onto this. I wouldn't go as far as the US to do the space trooper group or whatever Trump called it. We don't need to get there, but we certainly do need more funding for tech transfers and space based technologies. Any thoughts from Molly, Tony, before we wrap up?
I think just building on an earlier point of providing the funding at each TRL level and ensuring that they've got the money needed to kind of move through that scale, but also ensuring that we have a good understanding of other needs of these entrepreneurs or innovators at these different stages in terms of networking opportunities. And, you know, even just, I think Clélia mentioned that entrepreneurial journey, like how we can support people moving through this and ensuring that there's longevity and sustainability, and yeah, and making sure that it's, you know, a career path that people can maintain.
Great. Tony?
Yeah, I would agree with Molly on that. And Mike talked about it earlier with the research as more of a holistic approach to an end state of success, not just here's the funding, good luck. more of a marketing, an execution plan in the market, that type of, tell them they've succeeded at the start and give them the tools to get it right to adaptation. I think that's a good point Mike made about there's brilliant ideas that are, they're not marketers, they're not company business people and stuff. And those people need the skill set of people brought in to help them to succeed. So to Molly's point and to Mike's, I think that's a good area to highlight and focus on for future funding methods and models is to bring those discussions up more.
Great, appreciate that. Thank you very much to all of you for participating today. That was a good discussion. I do want to thank our sponsors, Gallant and Agwes Bio as well. If you haven't done so, to the attendees, sign up to our third moderated webinar on April 21st, where expert panelists will review insights on intellectual property strategies for Canada's agri-food sector. Thank you very much, everyone. Clélia, Mike, Molly, Tony, it was really interesting, especially to me. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Pleasure, sirs.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.